Hi everyone, Jeremy Simon here from 3D Universe. I've been talking to some folks about the Simplify3D software used for 3D printing, slicing, and etc. And there's been a lot of interest, but the trouble with it is it's expensive software as far as the slicing programs go. Most of them are free. This one costs $140. And as of now, the company is not offering any kind of free trials or evaluation copies. So I thought I'd put together a little video demo to show you what the program has to offer and why it's my personal favorite, and help you decide if it's worth the cost for you. So I'm going to move as quickly as I can through this, but there's a lot to cover, so probably end up being a lengthy video here. Feel free to scroll on through to find what you're interested in. But the first thing I guess I would point out is under the Help menu, once you get it installed, Quick Start Guide is linked to a PDF that is really worth going through. It's only 10 pages, gives you everything you need to know about navigating through the program and getting your prints ready and getting your first print going. So definitely recommend taking a look at that. The program options are all spread out through the menu, but most of the commonly used functions are right on screen. It's divided into different areas. As you can see, you've got an area to manage your models over here on the left, and then lower left you can manage your print settings. Over on the right you've got a quick toolbar with some quick access to various functions that we'll look at, and then in the middle you've got your build table preview, and it's going to show us our objects and how they're laid out, etc. So I'm going to go ahead and pull in some objects here. Just use Explorer and go find something I'm going to be doing a print on. So this is a prosthetic device that I'm going to be printing, and I need these 4 parts in this case. I'm just going to drag them right in there. As you can see, it just sort of drags them all into a clump here, so you can click on this Arrange button and software will automatically arrange them nicely for you. You can control all that manually then if you like, using various mouse and keyboard combinations. These are somewhat controlled under the covered under the Quick Start Guide, but not all of them. For example, the basics you'll figure out easily. Left click drag to move around, right click drag to pan around, mouse wheel lets you zoom in and out, and then you get things like control left click drag, which lets you move and reposition your objects, and it switches to a nice handy overhead view when you do that. Control left click drag. Then you have alt left click drag for rotating an object if you want to adjust how it's oriented. And then you have, let's see, I believe there's a control shift to move all objects, and likewise alt shift left click to rotate all objects at once. So things like that can be very handy in quickly moving your objects around, getting them rotated the way you want. Oh, I think there's another one. Shift right, no, control right click, there it is. Control right click is to scale an object up and down. Like I said, most of those are covered in the manual. You can always get to that as well by double-clicking on an object in your list or double-clicking on the object itself. You get this nice detail screen where you can manually specify positioning, scaling, rotational offsets, and it gives you a summary of your current measurements and positioning down at the bottom. Then over here you have your print settings down on the bottom, and that's where you can control everything you'd like. Down on the bottom you've got all sorts of advanced options, but most people might be satisfied with what's on top. You can just specify a material, PLA, ABS, PVA, or nylon are pre-configured, medium or high quality, and it'll automatically set up everything for you then. You can then control your infill percentage with the slider, turn rafts and support on or off with a checkbox, and away you go. If you'd like to get into all the advanced settings, they're down on the bottom here. A quick review, you've got extruder settings here that let you cover everything you'd want to related to extrusion. Layer parameters in terms of your layer height, which extruder you want to use for your object print, how many solid layers, perimeter shells, outline direction, which is handy for being able to control inside out, is going to give you better performance on overhangs, for example. Let's see, first layer settings, 85%, 50% speed. So this is 85% layer height, makes it a little bit more squished down into the bed platform to help with good first layer adhesion, and slower speed on the first layer does the same thing. You can turn rafts on and off, skirts or brims on and off, and control those things here. You can start printing at a certain height and stop printing at a certain height. So maybe you want to do a model in sections. You can do that here. And you can include solid diaphragms every so many layers. So if you want a horizontal solid layer cutting across the model at certain intervals, you can do that either for additional strength or water tightness or other reasons. On your infill tab, you can control which extruder does your infill, what type of infill, rectilinear or concentric, percentages, how much it overlaps with the outlines, your minimum length for an infill to be used, and sparse infill. This is worth explaining. You can, if you're using small enough layers, you can double up on infill and support so that, for example, I could set layer height to 0.16 millimeters. And that way, every time it prints the outlines of the object, it'll print 0.16 millimeter layers, and it'll look really nice on the outside. But then on the infill, I can say do that only every 2 layers, so that the infill will be printed every other layer at 0.32 millimeters, which happens to be 80% of my 0.4 millimeter nozzle, which is about as high as you want to go before you start getting warnings about extrusion. Same thing for support. You can specify sparse support every so many layers. And this way you could get a very efficient print while still having very high quality on the outer surface. So it's a nice feature to have. So also on the support tab, you can turn on or off support globally for this set of print settings. Select what extruder is being used for support. So for example, if you want to do dissolvable support, you can stick that in your other extruder and turn that on here. You can specify how dense you want your support to be and specify how much your separations between your support and the object should be. This is horizontal, so sideways between the support and the object, and then on the top and bottom how many layers of separation you want to have. So you can get that fine-tuned so that the support is nice and easy to remove. Automatic placement. So if you don't manually specify support, which I'll show you in a moment because that's one of the greatest features of Simplify3D, this would be the default, which is support pillar resolution, which you'll see soon, and max overhang angle. So anything that's over a 45-degree angle would get support. You can specify manual infill angles for support as well. Temperature controls. Temperature can be controlled by the right, left extruder and the build platform if you have it installed, and then you can define individual set points for each one of those. So I might want to have it do the first layer at a certain temperature, and then for the second layer and beyond I might want to have it drop down a little bit and use a different temperature. Or for certain materials you get a different finish. For example, you get a glossier finish at higher temperatures and a more of a matte finish at lower temperatures on some materials. So you can use this to get really creative and alternate temperatures every so many layers and start to get really nice artistic finishes on your objects as well. Cooling lets you specify things like slowing down automatically if your layer is below a certain amount of time, or using fans in certain conditions to control cooling. G-code lets you specify settings related to your G-code in your printer in terms of your offsets. For example, if you were printing on top of a glass plate, you might want everything to be raised by 3 millimeters. You could also do that with a shim, but you can do it here if you like. You can specify over here the dimensions of your printer, where your origins and center points are, etc. Over on scripts, you've got all your G-code, your startup code, your layer change code, your tool change code, and your ending G-code. The program is pretty good about generating default code, but you can modify that all you like. It also has the built-in ability to create X3G files using the GPX plugin so that you don't have to mess with that manually. It'll handle all that for you if you're using a MakerBot compatible printer. And then under Other, you've got settings related to speed. Note that it's millimeters per minute. This is a very slow speed because I have it set up for a nylon-based print. You can go slower for outlines, slower for support. You can have a much faster speed for travel movements, and then a slower speed usually for your Z-axis movement because it's only going in minute movements. You can specify bridging settings, your filament diameter. Generally, you should measure your filament every time you load up a new batch and measure it with a digital caliper in several places, average the measurements and put that in here. And then you can control oozing with various parameters here. And it also has some built-in capabilities for fixing problematic objects, whether it be by discarding any non-manifold segments or healing them, or you can even just merge all the outlines into one single solid model if that suits the object in question. So lots of controls, as you can see, under print settings. If you'd like, then you can then specify an additional set of configuration options for certain objects in your build. So I could go down here to select models at the bottom, and I could select a couple of my objects, and maybe I don't want to use support with those objects. And that way you'll have your first profile used for a couple of objects, and the second profile would be used for the other objects. So you can control all of that here if you'd like. I'm going to go ahead and remove the second one and set this back to work on all objects. Now, once you get your print settings the way you want, you'll want to take a look at advanced support options. This may or may not be necessary depending on the object, but this is one of my favorite things about this program. I'm first going to go ahead and just drop my objects to get them positioned more normally. So there we go. Using this quick button over here, manually define support for model, I'm going to get to the window for managing support. And this is where you can really get control over how supports are put in. Support pillar resolution lets you control basically the resolution of the pillars that you're managing here in this interface, as you'll see momentarily. I think default is 4 millimeters. I like keeping it a little smaller, but don't go too small as it gets difficult to manage and really slows it down. Max overhang angle, I'm going with something a little smaller than the default here, 45. I'm using 30 degrees so that there would be more support because I'm using a nylon material. And at that point you can select an object and say click on apply based on overhang angle. I'm going to go ahead and do that on all 4 objects here. So all I'm doing now is applying the default supports, and close that window for a moment just to scroll on and show you that just put in support pillars everywhere where there's an overhang past 30%. And so you'll see that in some places, like these holes here, those were deemed to be too small, I guess, so it didn't use any, but some of these others it did. Now I want to change some of that, and so now I can go back to that same window where you manage support, and I can say remove existing supports. Now I can go in and manually start to remove, for example, these inside the bolt channels. I don't necessarily want to have to remove those supports, and that'll print fine without support inside there, so I can remove those. Now sometimes there's support that you can't quite see. There might be internal channels, and another nice feature is this button over here, Crosssection View. That lets you go ahead and enable a cross-section on the Z-axis or the Y-axis or the X-axis. I'm going to use the Z-axis here, and you can then scroll up and down through your object, and if you look at that object on the left there, I can now slowly scroll up and start to see that there is support inside that channel that I don't want, so I can just click on those individual pillars within this view to remove those supports from inside that channel. Continue then scrolling up. I don't really want that little channel filled either, so remove that. And just up and down a few times to make sure I didn't miss anything. And that one's looking pretty good. And then I would move on basically to the next model and repeat the same thing, scrolling up and down on the Z-axis or others as needed, and as I go, removing those little bits that I don't want. So I'm leaving the support that's more towards the outside, that's touching the build plate, that's supporting areas that need it. I'm just trying to get rid of the ones that are inside those inner channels. My experience has been that they're not needed, and you get a nice clean print when you remove those, which is one of the nice things the software lets you do. Go ahead and remove these from that horizontal channel, and I believe that's about it for this one. Yep, that one looks good. Go ahead and move on and do the other 2 the same way. There's a little channel there with some support. Take that out. Notice that one didn't really get any, so we're good there. Okay, that's looking pretty good. I'm moving pretty quick here, so I might be missing something, but normally I'll be a little more careful with this. Yeah, you want to get this right the first time. This can all be saved so that you won't have to do it again a second time. Okay, and go ahead and turn off the cross-section view now. Close that window, and now I'm going to flip these over. I'm going to look on the underneath side because sometimes A little support either gets missed or I accidentally removed one that I wanted. And what you can do is set these the way you want, and you can then go to add new support structures, and you can then manually place these supports back in. And what you're going to see is as long as you keep them close enough together, when the print goes, when the slice process occurs, it's actually going to merge these into one continuous sort of support pattern for better printing. So the pillars are just for the process of managing where you want the supports. I'm going to go ahead and fill these in. And then I'm going to recheck that one to make sure that it didn't carry up into any of those channels. Every once in a while I've found that it can do that. Nope, that looks okay. Okay, so I think we're good here. Click Done, and now we have our manual support defined. So it's going to be exactly where we want it, but not where we don't want it. Now the cool thing is that once you've defined all this, we've brought our objects in, we've positioned them, we've scaled them, we've set our print settings, we've defined manual support. I can now go to File and then Save Factory File As. And this is going to let me save a factory file that contains all of these different settings, including the models, the positioning, the configuration on the print settings, the manual support, everything. And I can then load that file up, and I can come back in and I can make further modifications to any of those settings later. So that's a really nice feature for coming back and making quick changes. So I'm going to go ahead and see how this looks then, which brings us to another great feature of the program, which is the visualization. Click on the Prepare button down here in the lower left. I'm going to give it a name, and it's going to generate the G-code file. It's also going to generate the X3G file and drop it in the same directory because I had that option enabled. So there it goes, and this is something else you'll notice is just how fast it is. In fact, it's already done. It just did the slicing, it did the G-code generation as well as the X3G conversion, and it generated the preview visualization all in a matter of seconds. So it's a very fast program. Now the visualization is great. You can use these controls on the bottom to sort of slide up and down and look at exactly how things are going to print. I usually like to take a real careful look going one layer at a time on the bottom layers. Notice that you can control whether you're moving a line, which is one line of G-code at a time, or layer. So you can go layer and then go one at a time to see your layers exactly as they're going to print. You can then zoom in real close. Maybe I want to see exactly how that raft is going to look. So I can go in and see exactly how dense it is. I can see how the interface layers are going on top of it. And I can see then even the tiny little gap that's in between the object and the support as that goes up. You can observe those tiny gaps in there. So it really gives you a nice detailed visualization. You can also use the cross-section capabilities within this view if you want. So maybe you want to see a cross-sectional view while you're viewing this. You can then go back and adjust your slicing while you're seeing a cross section. There's all sorts of things that you can do with this. You can then even control what you're seeing. Maybe I want to see the rapid movements as well as the filament extrusions. Maybe I want to see the tool head itself as it moves across, and I can even have it indicate where retractions are happening. And then I can animate the whole thing. So I can have it show me the whole process, either line by line, or even I'm sorry, that was layer by layer, or even line by line. And this is going to require a faster playback speed because it's still going to be very slow. But as you can see, it'll actually take you through exactly what's happening with each and every line of code. And you get to see each and every movement that extruder is going to make. So it's a very helpful tool for examining your prints and making sure that everything is going to go as smoothly as possible before you hit the go button. So the visualization, as well as the manual support definition, probably my two favorite portions of this program. I think they did a really nice job on that. They also give you a nice control panel here where you can directly control everything in your printer. So here you have your library of files that you've compiled. Gives you a summary of estimated print times, material usage. You can see raw communications with your machine. You can see temperature monitoring for your extruders and heated build plate. You have your jog controls for manual movements. And then over here you have an emergency stop in case your printer gets in trouble. You've got various controls for dealing with your SD card as well as macro commands. And you have overrides for changing your movement speed and extrusion percentages in real time, which is kind of a nice feature. So that's about it in summary. It's, as you can see, a very full-featured program. I have not found anything yet that I can't do in terms of the plating and the slicing process for 3D printing. The only thing I really do outside of this is some of the initial preparation in NetFab Basic to examine a model for any major errors, maybe do some positioning. Sometimes I slice a little bit off the bottom of a model to make sure it's going to lie nice and flat, and I do that before bringing it in here. But everything else from that point forward, Simplify3D handles nicely. So if that seems like the sort of thing you're looking for, maybe the $140 would be a worthwhile purchase. So hopefully this has been helpful. If you have any questions, let me know. Talk to you guys soon. Bye-bye.